The sky over the human refugee fleet was a void, a perfect and utter blackness punctured only by the hard, uncaring light of distant stars. Aboard the generational Ark Oasis, Alara watched the main view screen, her fingers tracing the cold glass. Behind them, their homeworld, Terra, was a fading ember in the darkness. Its biosphere collapsed not by war, but by a silent, inexorable stellar shift. Humanity had fled, a desperate exodus of 100 arks, seeking a new home. They had found only silence and scarcity. The galactic community, the Accord, had politely, firmly closed its doors. Humanity was judged, too violent, too emotional, too young. A species not worth saving. Alara was the chief xenoarchivist, a keeper of dead hopes. Her current task was sifting through long-range sensor data of their proposed next destination, a supposedly lifeless system. Her console pinged, highlighting an anomaly on the fourth planet. Not a mineral signature, not a natural formation. It was a structure, immense and old, buried under millennia of rock and ice. The pattern was achingly familiar, a geometric spiral she'd seen in ancient Terran myths and children's storybooks. A dragon, coiled in slumber. She brought it to Captain Wren. "It's impossible, sir. A pre-space myth. But the pattern, its intelligent design. And it's broadcasting a single, repeating pulse on a frequency we use for deep-time geological surveys. It's listening for us." Wren, a pragmatist worn thin by failure, scoffed. "Afferitale, Alara. It's a rock formation. It's calling," she insisted, her voice quiet. "It's using a human frequency. What if the myths weren't myths? What if they were memories? Not of beasts on our world, but of something that visited us long ago." A debate raged. To divert the dying fleet to a dead world was madness. But the Oasis and two other arcs, the Endeavor and the Whisper Song, were failing. Their energy reserves were critical. The planet, designated Cradle 4, had frozen water deposits. It was a risk they had to take. The landing was a harsh ballet on a glacier-covered plain. The air was thin and biting. Scouts found the structure, not a carving, but a ship or a being fused into the mountain. It was scales of stone, vast wings folded like continental plates, a crest of crystalline spikes. And, at its heart, a faint, warm ember of energy pulsed in time with Alara's own heartbeat. Using adapted mining lasers, they carefully melted the ice around the central crest. Alara, in her environment suit, was the first to touch it. Her bare hand, against protocol, pressed against the scale. It was not cold stone. It was warm, and beneath a layer of rock, something like iridescent metal shimmered. The myth spoke of dragons as hoarders of treasure. This one's treasure was not gold. As Alara made contact, a data stream, raw and overwhelming, flooded her mind. Not words, but sensations. The warmth of a yellow sun, the scent of a pine forest, the sound of a human child's laughter, the crushing grief of a species leaving its cradle forever. And a purpose, a solemn, ancient vow, buried deep in the creature's code. "It remembers Earth," Alara gasped, pulling away, tears freezing on her cheeks. "It remembers us, from before we built cities." It was a guardian. Suddenly, the Accord found them. A sleek, silver dreadnought, the Judicator, descended from the jump point, blocking the weak sun. A holographic visage of the Accord emissary, a being of elegant, chitinous plates and cold, compound eyes, filled their comms. "Human fleet," the voice was a sterile chime. "You have trespassed into a zone of historical preservation. The entity you disturb is a relic of the First Age, a danger to the galactic order. You will depart immediately. Your species is not authorized for interaction with such artifacts." Captain Wren stood tall. "We are claiming sanctuary. This world is unclaimed. The galaxy is claimed," the emissary stated. "Your kind has no place here. Your history of conflict disqualifies you. You will leave, or you will be removed." As the transmission ended, the human crews looked at the mountain, at the stone dragon. They were trapped between a cold, rejecting universe, and a sleeping myth. Alara, her mind still echoing with ancient memories, knew the Accord's fear was not of the dragon, but of what it represented, something older, wilder, and more powerful than their ordered civilization. She turned back to the frozen Leviathan. "They're afraid of you," she whispered. "Help us remind them why." Tensions on cradle, for crystallized like the permafrost. The judicator hung in the sky, a silent, gleaming sword. The human arcs, skeletons of their former selves, huddled on the ice, their reactors a faint, struggling hum against the oppressive dark. The Accord had issued an ultimatum, 12 standard cycles to depart. Non-compliance would be met with dimensional anchoring, trapping them in this system forever, a slow death sentence. Alara became the dragon's voice. Working in a makeshift lab heated by portable generators, she and a team of neuroscientists and historians interfaced with the relic. They learned it was not a ship, but a being, a cosmic draconis, a seed of a species that had sown itself across the young galaxy. They were not conquerors, but gardeners, shepherds of life and memory. This one, its true name a frequency humans could not vocalize, had tended to primordial Earth. It had watched the first mammals rise, had felt the first spark of human consciousness, a bright, curious flame in the darkness. It had sworn an oath to that flame. "It doesn't speak in words," Alara explained to the Council of Captains, her eyes hollow from sleepless, vision-filled nights. "It speaks in legacy." It hid here in a self-imposed tomb when a great silence fell across the galaxy. The rise of the Accord's precursor, a culture that prized uniformity over wild growth. The dragon went to sleep to preserve the memory of all the life it had nurtured, including ours. Captain Wren of the Oasis rubbed his temples. "A beautiful story, archivist. But can it fight? Can it get us off this rock?" "I don't think it fights the way we understand," Alara said. "It doesn't wage war. It rewrites." Meanwhile, the Accord emissary Vexel studied the humans. Their defiance was illogical. Their attachment to a dead myth was a disease of sentiment. He ordered show of force. A single, precise energy lance shot from the Judicator, not at the arcs, but at the glacier before the dragon. The intent was clear, a warning cut. The ice erupted in a steam explosion, showering the site with debris. The mountain shivered. It was not an earthquake. It was a shudder, like a great beast stirring from a long dream. A deep, subsonic hum resonated through the planet's crust, vibrating in the bones of every human. The stone scales of the dragon began to flake, shedding eons of rock. Underneath, a material like captured twilight shimmered, drinking in the weak starlight and glowing with a soft, internal fire. Panic erupted on the Judicator. Their sensors, designed to read energy signatures of 1,000 civilizations, went blind. The dragon emitted no weapons-grade power, no shield harmonics. It emitted biography. It broadcast the history of Earth, from the first photosynthetic cell to the launching of the first rocket as a tangible field. To Vexel, it felt like an assault on reason itself. Alara, feeling the awakening through a neural link, stumbled from her lab onto the ice. She looked up. One great, slit-pupiled eye, larger than her ship, had opened in the mountain. It was not a biological eye. It was a vortex of nebulae and amber light, holding the wisdom of epochs. It focused on her, and in her mind she felt a profound recognition and a question. Do the embers still glow? She understood. It was asking if humanity's spirit, its will to reach for the stars, its capacity for wonder and sacrifice, still lived. She thought of the engineers jury-rigging repairs, the parents comforting children in the cold, the artists on the arcs who still painted, who still sang. She projected every memory of the Exodus, not just the despair, but the stubborn, ridiculous hope. We kept the fire, she thought back, with every fiber of her being. The dragon's other eye opened, with a sound that was the opposite of the Judicator's silent threat, a deep, tectonic welcome. The great head began to rise from the mountain. Wings of solar wind silk and cosmic dust unfolded, casting a vast, protective shadow over the human arcs. The Accord's warning shot had not provoked a weapon. It had provoked a parent. Vexel, aboard the Judicator, felt a cold fear he had never known. This was not a technology to be analyzed. This was a force of nature, an elder god from a time before laws. He gave the order. Dimensional anchors deploy and target the organism. Show it the futility of primitive defiance. Tendrils of blue energy shot from the dreadnought, aiming to pin the dragon in place, to cage reality itself around it. The humans on the ground watched, helpless, as the anchors flew towards the awakening Leviathan. The dimensional anchors struck, but they did not latch. They splashed against the dragon's shimmering hide like rain on a pond, the complex energy matrices unraveling into harmless, spiraling light. The creature's very existence seemed to operate on a different set of physical laws, a narrative logic older than the Accord's physics. Its wings, now fully unfurled, were not for flight in an atmosphere. They were canvases upon which stories were painted with starlight. Constellations from lost galaxies, the dance of DNA, the eruption of volcanoes on young worlds. The Judicator unleashed its primary armament. Focused beams of particle disruption energy, capable of reducing a continent to molten slag. The beams converged on the dragon's chest. The eyes for miles around flashed to steam, obscuring the view. Alara screamed, a raw sound lost in the roar. When the steam cleared, the dragon stood, unharmed. Where the beams had struck, its scales glowed brighter, as if fed by the attack. The absorbed energy traveled along luminous pathways under its skin, gathering at the base of its throat. The great head tilted back, and it did not roar fire. It sang. The song was the opposite of destruction. It was the sound of a world being born. It was the crack of the first seed, the babble of the first stream, the cry of the first human newborn. It was a wave of pure, coherent life. It hit the Judicator not as a blast, but as a revelation. On board the Accord vessel, systems did not fail, they blossomed. Sterile corridors were suddenly veined with glowing, root-like patterns. Control consoles sprouted crystalline flowers that emitted soft, calming light. The holographic displays dissolved into swirling, beautiful images of forests and oceans they had never seen, Earth. The crew, beings bred for logic and discipline, were overwhelmed by sensations they had no genetic memory for. The smell of damp soil after rain, the comfort of a hand's warmth, the bittersweet ache of nostalgia for a home they never had. Vexel staggered on his bridge, clutching his head. Data streams of efficiency reports were replaced by poetry. Ancient human sonnets about love and mortality flooded his mind in his own language. He saw, through the dragon's song, the true history of humanity. Not just their wars, but their hospitals, their astronomers mapping the stars with wonder, their musicians composing symphonies to joy and loss. He felt the crushing weight of their exile, the depth of their love for their lost blue world. It was an empathy balm. The Judicator's weapons fell silent. It was no longer a warship, but a vessel adrift in a sea of profound, unwanted understanding. On the ground, the humans witnessed a different miracle. Where the dragon's shadow fell, the frozen ground grew warm. Hardy, impossible grass, green and vibrant, broke through the ice in spreading circles. The very air thickened, becoming richer, breathable. The dragon was not just defending them. It was terraforming, turning this dead rock into a cradle, just as it had done for Earth eons ago. But the effort was costing it. The glorious light in its scales flickered. The song wavered. It was an ancient being, and its power was vast but finite. It had spent millennia in hibernation, and this awakening was a desperate final act. Alara felt its fatigue through the link, a deep, mournful ache. "It's dying," she said to Captain Wren, her voice breaking. "It's giving everything to make us a home." Wren, watching the grass grow at his feet, made a decision. Then we don't let its sacrifice be just for this rock. The Accord has to see, not just that one ship, but all of them. He barked orders. Channel all non-essential power from the arcs. Boost our comms. Broadcast everything. The visual, the sensor data, the feeling of it. Broadcast it on every frequency to the whole damned galaxy. Human ingenuity, their stubborn will to be heard, fused with the dragon's ancient magic. The arcs became amplifiers. They broadcast the dragon's song, the vision of a second chance, the raw, undeniable truth of humanity's spirit, not as a plea, but as a declaration. In the silent, watching galactic core, 1,000 civilizations received the transmission. They saw the cosmic Draconis, a being from their own creation myths, shielding the humans. They felt the song of life. They witnessed not a violent uprising, but a weary guardian giving its last breath to protect its children. The Accord's narrative of humanity as a savage, failed species shattered against the overwhelming, beautiful truth. The Judicator, now a garden of light and memory, received new orders from the Accord High Council. They were orders of stand down, of confusion, of panic. Vexel ignored them. He was weeping, for the first time in his species' history, for a world he had never known. He opened a channel to the oasis, his voice stripped of its sterile chime, now trembling with awe. "Humanity," he said, "what have you done?" The song faded, leaving a profound silence that was not empty, but full. The dragon, its twilight scales dimmed, settled back onto the reformed earth, not as a mountain, but as a resting giant. Its great head lay on the now verdant plain, its breath a warm, gentle wind that rustled the newborn grass. The light in its eyes was soft, the color of a setting sun. Above, the Judicator hung, passive, its weapons inert. Across the galaxy, the transmission had struck a chord deeper than any political decree. Worlds began to hail the human fleet, not with pity, but with a tremulous, awestruck curiosity. The Accord, its authority crumbling under the weight of revealed myth, fell into disarray. But for Alara and the humans on Cradle 4, now renamed Vigil, there was only the quiet at the heart of the storm. They gathered around the dragon, not as supplicants, but as children at a beloved elder's bedside. The creature's time was measured in breaths. Alara approached, the neural link now a faint, tender thread. She placed her hand on its warm snout, feeling the slow, deep pulse of a star nearing its end. The embers are safe, the thought came to her, clear and full of a deep, cosmic satisfaction. They burn bright, brighter than before. "We can help you," Alara whispered aloud, tears flowing freely. "Our doctors, our engineers." A laugh like a distant supernova echoed in her soul. "You cannot mend a story that has reached its final, perfect sentence. My purpose is fulfilled. I have seen you home." "But this isn't our home," she cried, looking at the small, green oasis in the vast ice. "It is now, and it will be for others. I have planted the seed. You will water it, not just here, but everywhere you go. You carry the song now." The dragon's body began to dissolve, not into death, but into light. It was a gentle unraveling, scales becoming swarms of fireflies that rose into the air, shimmering motes of memory and potential. Its form dissipated, flowing into the ground, the air, the very fabric of the planet. Where it lay, a great tree, with bark like opal and leaves like stained glass, began to grow at an impossible rate, its branches reaching for the stars. At its base, a spring of crystal-clear water bubbled forth, warm and sweet. The dragon was gone, but Vigil was alive. The terraforming was self-sustaining, a final gift. The ice retreated, revealing fertile soil. A gentle, permanent climate established itself under a newly formed atmospheric shield, a shimmering aurora that danced in the sky, the dragon's final breath, guarding its charge. The human refugees fell to their knees, then rose, embracing, Their faces turned to the warm, artificial sun. They had come as beggars to a graveyard. They were now stewards of a living world. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The Accord emissary, Vexel, requested to land. He came not as an enforcer, but as a pilgrim. He stood before the Tree of Vigil, a monument of living history, and offered not just sanctuary, but a seat. The galaxy has forgotten its stories, he said to the assembled human council, his voice humbled. You have reminded us. The Accord is reassessing. We would learn from you. We would hear the stories of Terra. We would understand the song. Humanity, hardened by exile and sanctified by sacrifice, was cautious but wise. They accepted the offer, but on their terms. Vigil would be a neutral ground, a library of lost histories, a beacon for all who sought not just to live, but to live with meaning. The other refugee arts were welcomed, not just here, but in systems now open to them. Alara became the first keeper of the Vigil. She taught others how to listen to the whispers in the leaves of the great tree, how to read the history of the galaxy in the patterns of the aurora. The myths of Earth were not fantasies. They were fragments of an old promise, now kept. Years later, on a clear night, the new generation of humans, born under the dragon-lit sky, would gather. They would point to the aurora, which swirled with particular brilliance, and tell the story. They would speak of the day the universe said no, and a forgotten guardian from the dawn of time said yes. They would tell of how humanity, in its darkest hour, was not saved by weapons or technology, but by the simple, enduring power of being remembered, and by being found worthy of a love that spanned the ages. The final dragon had not fought for them. It had borne witness, and in lighting the sky one last time, it had not just given them a world. It had reignited the oldest, most powerful flame of all. Hope, not just for humanity, but for a galaxy that had grown too cold and too quiet. And humanity, forever changed, vowed to carry that light, to be in their own stubborn, compassionate, and brilliant way, the dragons for those who would come after.